Hi, welcome to my channel. I thought I would tell you today about being homeless in the States. So if you watched any of my other videos, if you haven't, that's alright. What's up? You can check them out. But I've touched on this subject just a little bit, and I thought I would just go ahead and flesh out the story for you. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. We know I'm not the one for that, but I'll try. So, how did it all happen? Way back in the day, I used to be married. I've hinted at that as well. Just so you know, it was not a healthy relationship, and there was no physical abuse, but there was every other kind. You know what I mean? Except for schmegs. That was psychologically, yeah, but physically, no. So anyway, it was rough. It was rough, and I decided that I wanted to stop doing that. I had been in that relationship for 5 years, and I tried all the stuff. I did all of the talking. I did all of the trying. I did all of the listening to other people, and I was like, you know what? This is not the thing. Because, like, when I was listening to other people, people were like, well, are they hitting you? And I'm like, no. They're like, then why would you leave? Because I don't like psychological, emotional breaking my identity type, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? I don't like that. Do you like that? Okay, that's what I thought. All right, so I didn't like that. I was in a place where I felt like I was kind of losing myself and losing my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't remember what life was like before this relationship. Even though I had been single that whole time, I was significantly happier, like even with insecurities and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I was like, let's get out of this. So so I did. I got a divorce, and at the beginning of our relationship, which was a bad move on both of our parts, I asked him to help me fund a class for real estate. Now, this was like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like it was run by those people. So the program ended up being much more than just taking a real estate class, you know what I mean? Because to be a real estate agent, it's like a $400 class. But this class was like 17 grand, and it was very poorly organized, if I do say so myself. Don't come for me. No legal responsibility for that segment whatsoever. But anyway, the moral of the story is it was a hefty sum of money. It was more than $10,000. And I was like, I'm going to make this work. I did not make it work. I ended up, I did give it a good old fashioned go, but it didn't work out. So when I was getting divorced, part of the way I wanted to pay him back was to let him keep the house. We had gotten a house together. He had the credit for it. I did not have the credit for it. So it was really his credit that got the house, and my name was just kind of on it as an afterthought. So yeah, if I knew then what I know now, right? And that property doubled the last time I checked. Who knows how much it's worth now, but the property value doubled from back then, so good for him. Anyway, I did end up doing real estate, and it did end up benefiting him, huh? Look at that. But anyway, my way of paying him back was to let him keep the house, because I was like, this is that very large sum of money I gave you, it's a little less than half what we paid for this house. So I was like, if I just let him have the house, debt square. So that's how I came to have nowhere to live. Now, I left that marriage with my van, which he paid for, and $2,500, and that was it. So I went and lived with a friend, and I was living with that friend, and that was going fine, but I was not adjusting well after all of the mental and emotional abuse. And I was convinced, as I was told by my family and him, that my handling of money was the reason why we broke up. No, it was the abuse. That's why we broke up. But at the time I didn't know what was wrong, and I was like so badly gaslit that I believed that. So In order to make more money, I decided I was going to become a truck driver. I got the license. You know what I mean? I did the thing. I went through truck school, but the truck school I went to, I had to live at a nearby campus or whatever. And when I got out of truck school, and when I got out of that campus, I didn't have anywhere to go. The first place I went was a friend's house. She relieved me of some of my money with like manipulative things. She wasn't paying the bills in the house that she was living at, and she was like, "Hey, can you pay these bills for me?" One of them I didn't mind paying. I considered it rent, but the rest of them, not my business. You know what I mean? But she was like that. You know what I mean? Yeah, just using people for relief. I wasn't the only one. And I had already been warned about this from other friends who had lived with her. And I just wasn't listening. So I needed somewhere to go. And she said the right thing. So I trusted her word. Yada, yada. Anyway, I ended up leaving her place for the truck school. After truck school was done, I decided to live with my mother because my mom was old. She was terminally ill. And I was like, well, maybe she's better than my childhood. I actually don't know why. It just felt like the right decision, to be honest. And it turned out to be a good one, even though it was like honestly very painful and horrible to endure. It was the right decision to go there for closure purposes. But anyway, the moral of the story here is I went and lived with my mom. It was hell on earth. And I asked that friend, "Can I move back in with you?" And she was like, "No." I was like, okay. I guess I'm sticking it out with my mom then. So I did do that. I stuck it out with my mom, and then my mom passed. And we were in her place. We did not own her place. She did not own her place. She was renting. So I was living there illegally, you could say. We weren't the people on the rent. Since her passing, we just kept paying the rent, and they didn't bother to see who was living there, and they didn't bother to get us out. So we just stayed there. So I was living at the time with, there's 7 of us, 5 boys, 2 girls. 2 of the boys were living there. I think my sister had moved out. Anyway, 2 of my brothers were living there, and one of my brothers had his girlfriend and his daughter living there. That's fine. But I had to leave that situation because things were getting rough. And things were getting rough because my older brother that I was living with, he was becoming physically intimidating, punching washing machines and such because I dared to wash my clothes, etc., etc. That wasn't all to the story. The washing machine leaked, and it leaked into his area of the basement, and he was like, "If you wash your stuff, you'll have to clean it up." And I was like, "No problem." I was actually washing my stuff for an interview and not having a conventional job. I was a professional psychic at the time. Not having a conventional job was a point of contention. So I was like, why don't I get a conventional job then? And I needed to wash my clothes for the interview. So I did. And I had no problem cleaning it up. But how he approached me about it was, when you wash your clothes anyway, I felt like you were saying, F you, slam with the fist. I was like, this, I refuse. Dude. So the timeline on that is psychologically, emotionally abusive partner, manipulative friend, hell on earth with my mother, and now this. I was like, you know what? Nah. Nah. So I moved out again, moved into another terrible situation. Long story. Not going to get into that particular situation. But that person hounded me and hounded me and hounded me for rent. I came up with rent, and then they were like, you know what? Get out. I was like, sure. I don't even know how that one ended. I think I refused to walk her dogs. No, it wasn't that. I did refuse to walk her dogs, but she yelled at me until I did it. And I was like, I'm a grown-ass woman. Like, I don't have to walk your damn dogs. And I had a woman-to-woman conversation with that person. And I was like, look, boundaries are a thing for me. And while I appreciate living here, I will not deal with that situation again. You can't talk to me like that. So yeah, um, argument, kick out, moving on. So when that particular person was like, no, I lived in my van. Terrifying, but why not? So I lived in my van. I stayed at truck stops and stuff like that until I was like, hmm, this is too uncomfortable. This is too unfamiliar. So why don't I try a sibling? So I have 6 siblings. I knew I couldn't live with most of them. So I tried my older sister. When will I ever learn, right? You know what I mean? Toxic situation after toxic situation after toxic situation. So that situation was no different. It was also toxic, especially after my mother had passed. I was definitely the one who was very vocal about what our relationship with her was really like. I felt like now that she was gone, we could actually have real conversations and process what the relationship with her was like, but no such luck. But anyway, yeah, things were rough there too. But yeah, there ended up being like ridiculous arguments over money that I had receipts proving that I had done my part to the best of my ability, and also saying like, look, you agreed to this. This is what we're doing, and now you want to change the rules. That's fine. I can be petty. I can give you money every single day and you can count the receipts with me if you'd like. But anyway, that got crazy too. So I was like, you know what? This is not for me. So I made a conscious decision to go to Florida in my van and to live out of my van, like the van life folk. I had been following that movement for a hot minute. I really enjoyed the idea of being free to travel as much as I wanted and see beautiful places and be away from people if I so desired. You know what I mean? So I did that. Actually, not a bad thing. The only thing was my van wasn't set up for living. I had a no build type of rig and I did not bother to outfit that thing. To be honest with you, I was not in the headspace for it. I had never recovered from the marriage. I had never dealt with my mother's passing. There was nowhere to go to talk to about that. And then all of these other people, all of these other situations I had been in, I had to deal with those too. So I believe the term for it is dark night of the soul. But anyway, I was dealing with those things. So I did not outfit my van, but I made it as livable as possible. I had a cat, my baby. I had like a little area. I let down the 3rd row of seats in my van and then let that be the sleeping area. Had a spot for my cats, and then I just used my regular seats normally. As far as storage, as a minimalist, I didn't need much storage anyway. So that was all right, unless I had to pee at like 2 o'clock in the morning without a toilet in my rig, you know what I mean? But anyway, that was fine because eventually I did find a beach that I could park in Florida. I know. If you've ever been to Florida, you know they are mad hostile about people who are living in vans and stuff like that. Super hostile. But I happened to find a beach that was on Tampa Bay where the cops were pretty nice. They did not bother you. You could park your van on this free parking lot by the bay, and they would not bother you unless you were causing some kind of disturbance. So it was a gold mine. Not to mention, right down the street from that beach, there was a library. If you know anything about libraries, you can charge your phone there. So I had a battery pack that was like the power for my phone or anything I needed to power in my van, which is basically my phone, when there was no outlets around. I could charge that thing, read some books, watch my phone, use the Wi-Fi. It was fantastic. And then also on that strip was a bunch of restaurants that I did not go to, a grocery store, fire, and a little market that they would do every now and then. Also, on that beach, there was volleyball almost every weekend. There was concerts. So it was It was a good place to be, man. However, things did change. I got in a little bit of trouble in Florida, and I'm not going to get into that story, but I will tell you. Crazy story, but I will tell you that I lost my van. I may or may not have spent some time in jail. Such a crazy situation. But don't worry, I didn't do anything horrible. I just got into the wrong car and went into a hotel that I was asked to leave earlier that day. That was it. Didn't cause anybody any harm other than perhaps psychological harm. But anyway, yeah, rough time for me, my friends. But anyway, after that is when the homelessness started. When I didn't have the van to rely on, then it got rough. After leaving jail, there was a shelter next door. That was something. And I will say this, it is very powerful to listen to people's stories, because the shelter I was in, a lot of those people were being funneled out of the jail. And the women where I was, the amount of women who were in there because of some man. Too many. The amount of women who were in that shelter because they lost everything because of a man. Yeah, people's stories are pretty powerful. But anywho, I did that. There was a time limit on how long I could stay there. So when that time limit ran out, I went to a different shelter that was a little ways down the street. Luckily in Florida, they have quite a bit of social programs, best social programs I'd ever seen in my life, to be honest with you. I'm from Missouri. So going to Florida, where they had these amazing social programs, horrible culture, very religious culture. And if you watch my last video, you will know why that's not my thing. Check that out. But anyway, terrible culture in so many ways. But their social programs, top notch. I have not seen better in my personal experience. So monthly bus pass, $6. But you had to get something called a blue card. And also this was several years ago, so I don't know what rules may have changed. But anyway, you could get something if you were not, what's the word? If you had fallen on hard times, you could get something called the blue card. The blue card gave you a $6 monthly bus pass, free healthcare. Went to the dentist, went to the doctor. Girl, we were taking advantage of those services. But anyway, not sure why I brought that up. But anyway, that's why I had the bus pass thanks to the blue card. So took the bus right on down the street and got into a shelter that was 3 months. They helped you find work and they helped you find housing. Of course, I happened to get the one counselor that was not doing her damn job. She kept trying to make me do like labor jobs, you know, like those temp jobs where you go to a construction site at 4:00 in the morning and dig holes. I'm sorry, I have standards. So she kept trying to send me out to these really horrible, laborious jobs, and I was like, screw you, you're clearly not on my team, so I will go find myself a job. And did I? Yes. There was a place called the Bodhi Tree in the mall, in Clearwater, I think, and they were looking for a tarot reader. Guess what I do? So I did that, and honestly, I did better than I did in Missouri. It was some good work. However, as was the pattern with all of these other situations, there had to be toxicity. There had to be. So I was an independent contractor. That means my contract was with the owners of the Bodhi Tree, not the manager of the Bodhi Tree. This was very important because it was the manager who tried to fire me. I was like, bleh. Can I catch a break? Like, can I catch a break? Can we stop this? Universe, can we stop this, please? But yeah, so there was also another tarot reader. So when I came on the scene, this tarot reader was working Friday and Saturday. I was like, oh, bet. I'll work all the other days then. So the other tarot reader was like, is she trying to outperform me? I cannot have this. And she talked to the manager. We all met up and we all discussed a schedule that worked best for her schedule, because I was a free agent and she had children. So I was like, let's all work together and find a win-win-win situation. So we worked out the schedule where it was win-win. But there were signage that I could use to advertise that I was doing tarot. And the other tarot reader, first they were hiding the signs, and then the other tarot reader just took the signs home. I was like, okay. And then the manager started being like, every time she saw me, when are you going to make signs? When are you going to make signs? When are you going to make signs? First off, y'all have signs. You're just hiding them and keeping me from using them. That belong to the store. So that's on you. But also, there was an employee there who got tired of me being bullied about these stupid ass signs, and she made me some. Fire. So, yeah. Things were going really well with the clientele, actually. It was quite a fulfilling job to do. But then the manager comes to me one day and she was like, I don't think this is working out. And I was like, that long pause was very necessary because, like, tired. Just damn tired. I can't even tell you. So tired. But anywho, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to fight with this hoe. And I was like, I'm out. And I exposed her to her employers. And I don't know where that went, but that's where it went. But anyway, I was in the shelter. And I was running out of time in the shelter. We only got 3 months. I had a job, just lost the job, and was needing to look for other jobs. So I don't know where I got this idea, but I was like, maybe this is not the place for me. Because, I had not had much luck there either. So I was like, I don't know where I got this bright idea, but I was like, I'll go to New Orleans. Tarot reader. As I mentioned in the last video, I thought that would be a fantastic place to find a job, just even in a shop that like sells crystals or something. Like something, I can do customer service, I can do sales, I can do all of that stuff. I'd always been doing customer service, so I figure I could do that, but also in a field that is interesting to me. So I decided to go to New Orleans for new opportunities. You may have noticed that I did not have a vehicle or a place to live. So that landed me in the shelter in New Orleans. And this is where the real story begins. So I had already planned to stay in a shelter. I think you could stay in that shelter for, 20 days, something like that. So I intended to do that. This was a religious shelter. You had to get out at 6 a.m. I believe you had to be back in line by 4 p.m. to come in, listen to a sermon, get your dinner, strip out of your clothes, have your stuff taken from you and put in a different room where you would not have access to it, put on their clothes, and go to sleep, and then do it all over again the next day. So I was in this place listening to church. You may have noticed that as a tarot reader, that's not my favorite thing. But I was enduring it at first because they actually had some talented people who were coming from a good place with it. And then, church do what it do and the ridiculousness began. So anyway, one of these days I got so uncomfortable. I was like, hi, head lady. I am not religious and I do not want to sit through church. Is there a way that I can just skip that part and then just go to the dinner and bed part? And she was like, you're not Christian. I was like, no. She was like, then what's happening? I didn't tell her I was a psychic, but I did tell her that I'm just not Christian. Mistake. Mistake. Should have known better, honestly, because when I was coming into that shelter, the interview process was not about what you plan to do with your life. Do you plan to be employed? How long are you going to stay here? It wasn't about that. It was about how strongly you believe in Jesus. Do you know this Bible verse? What is your relationship with Christ? So I was like, I know this isn't my thing, but, desperate times, desperate measures, etc. So anyway, yeah, that started a problem. The next day in church, we had a new girl. The new girl was very talkative, and she kept talking to me during church. And I was like, you don't understand how this works. You need to be quiet or you're going to get in trouble. Head lady goes past the girl that was talking to me and tells me to be quiet. I was like, cool. So I didn't say anything else for the rest of church or whatever. So we go to dinner. And we're all sitting at the table, and these people are sharing these beautiful stories of their experiences, and I'm weighing in on their stories. I'm like, that's lovely, that's beautiful, etc., etc. And then the head lady is like, some of you are evil. Some of you are the devil, etc., etc. I was like, all right. So that's fine. So that passes. I come in the next day for the whole routine. And I don't remember when this was, but as I was looking through my stuff, when we left at 6 o'clock in the morning, I would just wait until the library opened and I would go to the library. So I could be there all day. They had computers. If you want to apply for jobs, you could probably do that online, et cetera, et cetera. And also AC out of the elements. Love libraries and could read a book on top of that. So love libraries. So I would just go to the library. So one day I went to the library and I discovered that I had a Batman hoodie that I kept with me. And someone at this shelter had gone into my bag and stole my hoodie. So on this particular day, I had my wallet and I was like, I had already reported to these people that my hoodie was stolen. They're like, we'll just put the cameras on your bag and you'll be fine. I was like, it'd be nice if I had my damn hoodie, but whatever. It was cold in the library. It's AC, you know what I mean? So it would have been nice to have my hoodie, but they stole it. I digress. Anywho. So I had my wallet and I was like, I understand that you guys keep us from our stuff. I don't know why they did that, but I understand you guys keep us from our stuff. So I have my wallet. My hoodie has already been stolen. I don't care if I don't touch my wallet all night. I don't care if it's locked up just in the same building I am. Just let me be near my wallet. 3 people come out, argue in my face, telling me you can either give us your wallet or you can sleep on the street. Universe, please. You know what I'm saying? I'm just like, help a player out. What is happening? Like, it was hell. It was hell on earth. Those years were absolute hell on earth. But anyway, I wanted somewhere to lay my head, so I gave them my wallet. The day progresses as it always does, church, dinner, etc. So we come back after church and dinner. A person above the head lady comes and is yelling in my face. And I'm like, excuse me? What's happening? She's like, I heard you were talking to church. I heard you were being disrespectful. I heard you don't want to be here, etc., etc. And I'm like, where did you hear that? It turns out the head lady, who knew that I was not Christian and did not want to go to church, had told her boss that I was doing stuff I wasn't doing, but mostly talking during church or being disrespectful or whatever. And got kicked out onto the street. Fun. I had never been on the street before, because even through all of that stuff, staying with friends, staying with my mom, staying in shelters, I had never been on the street. But here I was on the street. I got my stuff. People were watching. That was annoying. I left. I was freaking out. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I forgot my phone. So I was like, in all of the hubbub, I forgot my phone. So I went back and I was like, I need my phone. So they made this huge stupid production. So the head lady herself, who got me kicked out, would hand me my phone, and she had her chin in the air like I was going to start something. I was like, you're messed up. You're going to have to deal with your issues. And there will be a reckoning for you someday. I don't need to cause a scene. I don't care. I'm tired. So, yeah. Thus ensued 5 months on the street. So let me tell you what that was like. So I think my first week on the street was in adjustments. There was a public park right next door to the library where homeless people were allowed to sleep. They had bushes, which was your bathroom. Congratulations. And yeah, I had 2 bags with me. I expected to be living in a place, so those bags got heavy really quickly. But most of the time, I wrapped my straps around my arms when I went to sleep. But one night, I forgot to do that, and my bag was stolen with my birth certificate, my social security card, my phone, my headphones, all the important things that you need for finding jobs. So that was a good time. And by a good time, I mean horrible. It was terrible. It was annoying. It did lighten my load quite a bit. Eventually, I got rid of the other bag I had, and then I got a book bag with the bare minimum in it, and I dealt with being on the street. So someone offered me an opportunity to go to a shelter, but I didn't trust the opportunity because I had just gotten kicked out of the shelter. But anyway, I did try another shelter. Bad idea, of course. It was, what's the March of Dimes? Not March of Dimes. What are these people called? The Salvation Army. I didn't realize, I had been around the Salvation Army my entire life, especially around Christmas. You know, they ring the bell, they have the bucket, you put the money in the bucket. I didn't realize that the Salvation Army was a Christian organization. I know it's in the name, but it just never occurred to me. Well, I found out. I found out in New Orleans that it's a Christian organization. But anywho, I was on the street, lost my stuff, but there was a lot of infrastructure. As I noticed, or as I mentioned in my last video, maybe, great infrastructure in New Orleans. You could still do your laundry, you could still take a daily shower, you were always fed, and it was all down the street from the library. The library was a place that you could be safely and you would not be asked to leave. The park was across the street from the library where you could sleep and not be asked to leave. And then down the street from both of those was a place where you could get your laundry done. And they had a day center, which was another place that you could stay in all day until about 4 o'clock. And you had to get out. So I chose the library because it stayed open later. And I like books. And they had computers, and you didn't have to have a library card to use the computers. And the internet is the best escapism there is. Am I right? So anyway, luckily, I could still shower, I could still eat, because those places also provided food. I think the shower place down the street from the shower place, you could also take showers, but they also provided breakfast and lunch. So that was delightful. And I took full advantage of those things. I don't even know how I found out that these things existed, but I think I Googled back when I had a phone and asked some questions and found all of this stuff out. But that was rough. I ended up being on the street for 5 months with no identification, no anything. Luckily, one of these places helps you get your ID. This was right before COVID, and I was out of state. I'm from Missouri. I was in Louisiana. So the process took a while. It took me about a year to get my birth certificate and my social security card and some kind of ID so I could look for work. Too traumatized to do it at the time. But so I could look for work. Anyway, what it felt like to be on the street was awful. So I had never felt safe in my entire life, which, you know, long story, but moral of the story is, like, my parents were not safe. And then I got married and that person wasn't safe. And then, I just found myself in unsafe situations from then on out. So I never felt safe, but on the street was times 100. I felt totally exposed, like anybody could walk past, anybody could do anything. There's nothing I could do about it, right? Also, I was on the street. I'm 100% sober, even during this entire experience, unless you count food as a drug or the internet as a drug. 100% sober. I've always been 100% sober. I've always been a drug-free kind of gal. So I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do any of that stuff. So all of this stuff was endured in full living color with my entire mind about me. But anyway, what I found on the street was in New Orleans, I was on the street with people who were the stereotype. People who were on drugs, people who were ODing, people who pimps and prostitutes. Like, this was a world that I had nothing to do with, that I could, it was only in movies until that point. You know what I mean? It was only in movies. But aside from being absolutely exposed with no shelter from the elements, the library did have a porch, so that was kind of a shelter from the elements. You at least had a roof, if not walls. You know what I mean? But it's so vulnerable to sleep during the night and to know anybody can walk up and take something from you. Like, I would not wish that on anybody. I would not wish that on anybody. Cap that off with people who are drunk, fighting, ODing. I was like, universe, make it make sense, please. What did I do in this life or any other to endure some like this? Like, make it make sense, please. That was a dark time for me. I was not interested in life anymore. But I decided, no matter what, I'm going to stay here. I decided when I was very young and a teenager and I didn't want to be here anymore, that I was never going to do that. I was never going to give up. So I didn't. So I was like, all things pass, all things change. I didn't have a lot of hope, but just day by day, I just did every day by every day. Yeah, there was some shenanigans on the street, but one thing I will say is I did have somebody to talk to and somebody at the library. It wasn't terribly fulfilling, but she listened to me when I wanted to talk. Couldn't really get deep or anything like that. And then also, she was racist, which is okay. You know what I mean? She wasn't outwardly racist. She just thought that all black people didn't know how to read. You know what I mean? And she's from New Orleans, or she was in New Orleans, where the education level was, in fact, some of the lowest in the country. I'm not from Louisiana, but that didn't matter. It didn't matter how I spoke. It didn't matter that I already knew how to do a lot of stuff. She saw black and she saw poorly educated. Fine. It is it is not for me to convince you otherwise. But at least she was an ear, and at least she told me about programs where I could do like artistic things and etc. So that was nice. Anywho, yeah, I was not enjoying that part. Food. So someone told me when I was first in New Orleans, they were like, if you starve in this city, that's your fault. And you know what? They're right. Because one thing that people in New Orleans will do, that is feed the homeless. Churches fed the homeless. Of course, they had that infrastructure that fed the homeless. And then on top of that, on holidays, they did not leave the homeless out. People would come and give gift cards. People would come and give cash. People would make holiday feasts for homeless people. So that, I will say, I'm very grateful for. Like, I was not used to people showing up for people. So to see that was kind of beautiful, actually. And it's not something I would have seen if I wasn't in that situation, right? So that was that. I will say that was a positive. But yeah, being on the street was even worse than all the other nightmares. You know what I mean? Like, even when I tried to stay away from the people who were overdosing and the people who were trying to get girls to pimp, like, like dark, very not okay people. Um, Even when I was trying to get away from them and sleep in like a separate place where there were no people, I was asked by the police to go right back to where all of these crazy people were. So that was the only place we had permission to be. So that's where I was. I had to endure. I tried to isolate myself as much as possible so I could feel as safe as possible. But there's no such thing as safety on the street. There's no such thing as safety on the street. I had several adventures. I had people propositioning me. That was hilarious. Like, I don't know why. That was so funny. Yeah. Weird. Um, but yeah, crazy time. I would not wish that on Trump. You know what I mean? I definitely want him to be excommunicated from the rest of the human population, along with his friends and his cronies and his backers. I want literally all of them to be left on an island with nothing but food. Nothing but food. And they can go and destroy each other and leave the rest of us alone. But I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Um, that said, I eventually did get off the street, but it felt horrible. Some lessons learned from being on the street. I felt unwelcomed anywhere. I felt like I did not belong on earth. But also, I felt like I didn't belong in society. I felt unwelcomed in establishments. That was my own thing, my own internal thing. I felt like if I didn't have money to justify being in the establishment, then I had no business being there. That was something that I actually developed from being around the ex who felt guilty for using a restaurant bathroom without buying something. Whatever. Anywho, um, yeah. Food. When people give the homeless food, I will say New Orleans really showed up. Like, they were very kind and very generous about food. However, I've found that I don't like getting someone else's trash to eat. Um, and that's something I want to impart to people. If you feel so inclined to feed the homeless, give them something you would eat. If something is expired or if something is a little bad, don't think just because they're desperate they don't have any pride. Something I found out while I was on the street is that pride is all you have. You don't have stuff, you don't have money. Most of the time, people were isolated and didn't have friends and didn't have family. So, food is like really important. And the only thing that they do have is their pride, the intangibles, their sense of respect or whatever. Please, if you're gonna give to people, give them something you would eat. Just respect them that much. You know what I mean? That felt insulting to me because when I was on the street, like, this was the worst time of my life, right? I already felt like nothing. So I felt like to give me trash was like insult to injury. It was like, I don't know how to explain it other than I already feel worthless, and then you're going to give me something worthless. You know what I mean? So just think about that. Anywho, yeah, men. I found out that the homeless population is mostly men, and it's crazy. Uh, Mostly black men, actually, in New Orleans. Um, it's crazy to be a woman on the street. I was a single woman on the street. I tried to make friends with certain people, and I did make friends with certain people. And one of the things I found out is that everybody on the street isn't mentally ill or on drugs. Some of them do have jobs. Some of them do have degrees. Some of them came to the city and got robbed and got stuck because their cash and their ID was gone. So there you go. I found that so many people had gotten taken advantage of from someone else and they lost everything. That's called the invisible homeless. I would Google that. I found out about it myself when I was talking to some people who represented the city, and they were asking homeless people what they need and what they think. Um, and someone brought up the invisible homeless. That's the people who do have jobs, the people who do have degrees, but they had like one big financial issue that caused their homelessness. Divorce. To be honest with you, I was in no fit state to fix my life at that point, but I did try my hardest. But anyway, the moral of the story is that lasted for 5 months, and eventually I got into a shelter, and the shelter was based on mental illness. And you want to know what my mental illness was diagnosed as? PTSD. Trauma. What do you know? Yeah, so I got into a shelter, a women's shelter, from PTSD. Valid, that tracks. Went to the shelter, and the shelter just caused more crap. If you want to hear about that, I have that in my last video. I'll link it. And you can get that story, but I'm not going to go into it. But anyway, the good thing about this shelter is that it finally got me off the street. And this was right as COVID was about to hit. I believe I got into that shelter 2 weeks before COVID hit and there was lockdowns. So, man, the universe heard me. Whatever the toxicity was, I suppose that was my problem to fix. The constant pattern of ending up in toxic situations, that was for me to understand and figure out, I guess. But at least I got off the street before COVID lockdown, right? But anyway, 47 minutes. I'm coming to the end of the story, I swear. They eventually got me housed, and they got me into a permanent apartment in New Orleans. And I went to that apartment. But while I was in that apartment, the processing of everything that happened was not going well for me. I stayed in that apartment for a year and a half, I think. And then I was moving on. I was running away from all the stuff. So I bounced around to a couple of places. I went to Arizona, lived there for a while, lived in a shelter. It was a Christian shelter, same old story, crazy ass people. I did find a job. I was employed. I did move into an apartment, and wouldn't you know, the landlord was... So again, that was my problem to solve. I don't know why the pattern kept happening, but it did, and I kept losing in this pattern, and I couldn't figure out what needed to change. But anyway, same old thing, got kicked out of that place. She called the cops on me, and the cops discovered that her story and my story were vastly different, and they let me go because I was innocent, and I was already prepared. She had already tried to kick me out before. So you want to know what I got kicked out for? Oh, I'll tell you. It was me, the landlord, and the other roommates, and I wouldn't hang out with them. I spent all my time in my room. So since I wasn't a part of the girls, I shouldn't have been there, right? Also, the other roommate was not cleaning after herself, and I let the landlord know, and she was like, well, if you have a problem with it, you can leave. Run that back. I have to clean after myself. They don't have to clean after their self. But if I have a problem with them not cleaning after themselves, I need to leave. But I also am not allowed to not clean after myself. Got it. Cool. I don't know, man. It's just rough. But anyway, the moral of the story is that was the last of this wild journey, and I ended up back in Missouri where it all started, living with family where it all started. And that was how I got on my feet. Trying to get away from them was all the inspiration I needed to get a job, get my own apartment, and get back on my feet. The downside of that was, yes, I was back on my feet financially. Yes, I was getting much better at money management. I was having a good time with that, actually. But it wasn't just financial stuff I was dealing with. The financial stuff was easy. Trusting people, being in healthy situations with people, fear of people, etc. So that was the hard part. But anyway, I am okay. I did eventually get out of all of that. And here I am in Malaysia, figuring it out. So that is my story. That's a 50-minute story. If you sat through that, I would use both hands, but I'm using one hand to hold the phone. But appreciate you for listening to this entire documentary. I hope it made sense. My major takeaways from that situation is I hate toxic situations and I will leave them every time, as I have in this entire situation. But what I needed to learn was why I was getting in these toxic situations in the first place. They say it all starts in your childhood, and boy, does it. A lot of this was just repeating the patterns that I had had growing up. My mother was not the healthiest person, neither was my father. They stayed together for a little bit. They got divorced when I was about 10, and yeah. Everything that happened thereafter was a repeat of stuff that I had already experienced in childhood, and all I needed to do was find some kind of way to process that and let it go. Still figuring that out. I know homelessness is not for me and it'll never happen again. No. Hard no. I will figure it out, but I swear I'm going to figure something out that's not that. So, good to know. And then also I have these stories that I can share with other people. And teach them things, or like share with them what I've learned or what I've experienced. And hopefully it helps somebody in the world. But anyway, that's it. This is a long one. Like, comment, subscribe if you wanna. If you want to support me, you certainly can. I have a support tier on Patreon, $1. I have Buy Me a Coffee, link in the description for that. And that is all. Next time we'll do something lighter, right?